Good morning. Today is January 22nd, 2025. I'm Mark Blank, and this is the Commissioners' weekly meeting. Commissioner Gilman, any preliminary remarks, or are you ready to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Good morning, and I would vote to approve the consent agenda.
And I have to say, I like your background. I gotta see if I can figure out how to do it for myself. Commissioner Plant,
I approve the consent agenda as well.
as do I. Proceeding number 23A-0633G, Black Hills Clean Heat Plan. Mr. Mendelson, bringing it back from last week.
Yes, sir. Hello, Commissioners. I'm Mike Mendelson of your advisory team. I'm joined by Lindsay Dundas of Commission Counsel. This case was presented a couple of weeks ago, so I won't go into the full details. But as a quick review, Black Hills filed their CHP and came to a settlement with all but one party, SWEEP. SWEEP suggests far higher spending levels and a very different portfolio of resources, primarily focusing on beneficial electrification. SWEEP also notes the settlement would not even reduce emissions from current levels, let alone facilitate the statutory targets relative to the 2015 baseline. The Commission generally supported the settlement, but noted several of SWEEP's concerns and raised several of your own. Advisors have organized the discussion today into 7 decision points that allow us to cover the gamut of issues before us. So the first decision point is, does the Commission wish to limit spending to the 2.5% cost cap referenced in statute? I'll note that this was a key aspect of the settlement to minimize bill impacts. SWEEP suggested a budget nearly triple the size. To exceed the 2.5% cost cap, the Commission must assess 4 criteria that I can explain. Chair Blank mentioned that affordability is a primary concern, although he did not speak specifically to the 2.5% cost cap. I'll pause here.
Commissioner Gilman, I think it'd be my desire to stick to the cap for affordability concerns, and because of concerns about perverse incentives and them implementing electrification that Commissioner Plant outlined last week, but curious to hear what you think.
No, I agree with you on this point. I think on some of the other details that SWEEP brings up, I have some other thoughts and opinions, but with regard to the 2.5% cost cap, I think it's reasonable, especially in this initial clean heat plan, to stick to that cost cap. Although probably reassess some of the offerings and rankings of priority within how the 2.5% is spent.
Commissioner Plant.
I agree.
Mr. Mendelson.
All righty. So the second decision point is around the thermal pilot program. The settlement requires Black Hills to conduct a feasibility study to investigate an application in its service territory to understand the potential costs and opportunities of a thermal pilot program at a cost of $455,000. The study will include a siting analysis of potential locations, including considerations of the potential direct and indirect economic benefits to the company, its customers, and direct end users, avoided fuel and gas infrastructure costs, and impacts to each of the sites proposed from the development of the project in those communities. Commissioner Gilman suggested the order should place additional bounds not in the settlement to ensure reasonable assumptions and process are applied, thus improving the chances the money is spent wisely through stakeholder engagement centered on the development and likely outcome of the study. Commissioner Gilman did not offer specific guardrails she would put in place, but would look to other places we have required stakeholder engagement in study development. Commissioner Plant said he would like to see an aggressive effort to develop the thermal facility model. I'll pause here for your discussion.
I guess, why don't you get us going, Commissioner Gilman?
Sure, thanks. No, I'm excited, as I think many of the parties appear to be, for this inclusion in the settlement agreement. But I just think it could benefit from some more specificity around stakeholder engagement to ensure, as Mr. Mendelson said, that any money spent on this study really takes the most realistic and appropriate kind of assumptions and even locational analysis into account. So what I would offer as an idea is that stakeholders should be involved to vet the scope of work, whether I don't think it's clear from the settlement agreement if Black Hills employees will be doing this work or if they'll be hiring a contractor to do this study. But in any regard, you would assume there will be a scope of work to dictate what the study will encompass. So I would say stakeholders should vet the scope of work, the selection criteria, especially for the location that's being studied, and all of the inputs and assumptions and calculation methodology that the company expects to use. I would also say the commission should be apprised at each major step of the process and could provide a representative to participate in the stakeholder process. Any of those updates could be filed in this proceeding as they move forward. So those are some of my suggestions to ensure that we have some insight, potentially some representation, but importantly that stakeholders have some involvement in crafting that study and ensuring that the assumptions are reasonable going in so that we can all rely upon the results.
That seems sensible to me, Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, I agree. I think that seems like a really good approach. I would only add, a preference, not a directive, but a preference for, their pilot to be done if available on, income qualified housing development or some sort of application where it would benefit people who are income qualified as we're, evaluating the opportunities for this project.
That works for me. It seems like a good idea. Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, I would certainly offer that's something they could and should consider. I don't have a great view into what all their selection criteria will be, so I don't know that we can offer like how to rank that or that that's an absolute necessity, but would certainly agree with you in offering that that's something we would expect would be considered in site selection.
Does that give you what you need on that one, Mr. Mendelson?
Yes, it does. The third decision point is whether to alter the DSM expenditures or limit the relevant measures that can be supported through CHP funds. The settlement approved $13.24 million over 3 years, of which 20% is to be spent in the IQ community. The settlement dollars represent supplemental funding to implement traditional DSM program measures as approved via 23A 0361G, which is the company's DSM proceeding. So that the company does not have to wind down the traditional DSM programs due to budgetary constraints. In the event a DSM program exceeds 110% of the approved total annual budget, yet there are customers interested in participating in the DSM program, those customers may still participate in the DSM program via the CHP funds. Commissioner Gilman raised concerns that the rebates may not necessarily go to true improvement of efficiency. Instead, program dollars may only support replacing like-for-like measures and thus cause no actual GHG emission reductions. She would also limit the availability of gas DSM rebates to replacement of non-condensing, less efficient technology with more efficient technologies, and question the availability of rebates for new construction. Commissioner Plant indicated he was fine limiting the rebates to weatherization measures only. I'll pause here.
Commissioner Gilman, anything you'd like to add or modify to that description? I think you pretty much had 2 other votes last week, but just wanted to see if you had anything to add.
No, probably just to talk through kind of the details of the limitation and if we should keep any equipment involved at all or go kind of the route Commissioner Plant suggested and potentially just limiting to weatherization and shell measures, which certainly kind of simplifies the approach in terms of not trying to police or verify what was being replaced, to verify there were actual greenhouse gas emissions reductions associated with it. But I am, I certainly could be supportive, Commissioner Plant, if you're still looking to go that direction in terms of limiting DSM to weatherization and shell measures. I think it solves a few problems. First, the real potential for a significant number of like-for-like replacements right now, which are just kind of difficult to rein in and ensure that any equipment replacement is providing actual greenhouse gas savings. But also, I think kind of the real difficulty in looking at using customer funding to potentially extend the reliance on gas with brand new gas equipment, which may well be contrary to state policy and not provide us a path to the deeper greenhouse gas reductions that are required as we move forward under the statute. So for those reasons, I would be fine with going with Commissioner Plant's route, but curious if that's still how you're viewing it.
I don't feel strongly one way or the other. So Commissioner Plant, and it sounds like Commissioner Gilman is could go either way too.
Yeah, I would like to limit it to the weatherization measures. I would just note that there is a DSM plan as well, which does have incentives in it, that it's separate from the clean heat proceeding. But I think with a clean heat proceeding, it is more consistent with the objectives of the statute to limit the DSM to weatherization measures.
I'm good with that, and it sounds like you are too, Commissioner Gilman.
I am.
Issue number 4, Mr. Mendelson.
All righty. So issue number 4 is whether renewable natural gas or RNG expenditures should come with any guardrails. The settlement approves $1 million for RNG so that Black Hills may pursue as a clean heat resource beginning in 2027 renewable natural gas. Also, the settlement requires that BHCG will adhere to the AQCC recovered methane protocols and will submit specific RNG projects through the modified 60-90-day notice process. SWEEP objects to RNG, contending it is a high-cost resource that is added to the detriment of lower-cost resources. Commissioner Gilman wants to clarify the duration of the fund's availability and perhaps require that the fund commitment represents a total NPV value, similar to that approved for public service in its CHP, proceeding number 23A0392EG. There, we authorized a $5 million budget for recovered methane in 2025 and 2026 for a total of $10 million on a net present value basis, which can be allocated within one or more specific projects.
Commissioner Gilman, again, I think you had 2 votes for this guidance and clarification last week, but anything else to add?
No, I think just to be clear, I think we would be okay moving forward with the $1 million budget, but to clarify that that's on a net present value basis and not intended to be an annual expenditure for an unknown amount of time. And then given that there are no specific projects identified and the cost, terms, and environmental attributes of those are still unknown if any would be used, that the projects we would expect would still come forward with specific information and follow the 60-90-day process outlined in the settlement.
Commissioner Plant?
I agree.
As do I. Issue 5.
All righty. Decision number 5 is the decision point relates to advanced monitoring and leak detection, or AMLD, and whether the program needs to be cost effective. The settlement approved a $3.48 million budget for AMLD, allowing for vehicle-mounted, highly sensitive detection equipment that detects and quantifies methane plumes that intersect the path of the vehicle. In contrast, Black Hills explains, our current leak detection capability involves labor-intensive walking surveys by the specific assets with less sensitive equipment. The settlement states that the quantification of emissions following the written procedures submitted to the division will be verified by an accredited body or organization. Commissioner Gilman notes that costs will be booked as clean heat resources, but statute requires leak reduction to be cost effective. Accordingly, the settlement does not meet statutory allowance of AMLD as a clean heat resource.
Commissioner Gilman, anything you'd like to add, and what would you like to see in our order, and how would you like to treat this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I have a nuanced view on this. I think fairly I'm certainly supportive of the company developing AMLD technology and its use to find and remedy leak detection in the most cost-effective and timely way possible. So I certainly am supportive of them moving in this direction. What is not clear is if this is really a clean heat activity and should receive funding through a rider intended specifically to support clean heat resources and clean heat activities. At the end of the day, can I live with it? Yeah, probably. I have a little heartburn over this mismatch of collecting the funds in this way, but understanding the statute put some very clear and unique restrictions specifically on leak reduction, that they have to be cost effective. Clearly, that's not information that's before us or that we possibly know at this point in time. So with what we know now, we certainly can't say that these are clean heat resources. Can I live with the mismatch? Potentially for now. I'd like to point that out in the decision, but curious what you all think about kind of just that complication of we may be collecting money in a rider for which this particular technology really serves primarily some other purpose.
Concern and strongly support including it in the order and as guidance for next time. But given everything we got going on right now, I'm not looking to blow up or reject this settlement agreement. So I appreciate your willingness to live with it and move forward. So I like the idea of including language in our order, trying to address this going forward, but not blowing up the settlement agreement. Commissioner Plant, where are you at on this?
Yeah, I guess I'm a little on the other side.
You're ready to blow it up.
I think that one of the things that, I would say should be a principle is that we don't include anything that's not a clean heat resource in the clean heat rider. And as Commissioner Gilman pointed out, it's not a clean heat resource because there's no determination of cost effectiveness, which is, a requirement within the statute. So I looked through the testimony and I read through, exactly how this would be implemented, looking for some sort of an evaluation of cost effectiveness, and I didn't see anything. It takes a 5-year cycle currently and reduces it to a 3-year cycle. In terms of going through the lines and trying to detect leaks. Something that's done by foot would be done by vehicle, and about half of the cost is O&M. A little over $500K a year is O&M. And so I think we can assume that this might lead to some reductions, but there's no estimate as to how much. And if you can't, sort of estimate what the impact of an investment is, it's hard to say that it's cost effective or to say that there would be an evaluation of cost effectiveness. I would note that, in the GIP, this is something that is requested through the GIP. And it was also brought up that this could be included as a part of the next rate case. But as a part of the CHP, I just feel like we don't have the record to make a determination of cost effectiveness that would qualify it as a clean heat resource. So, so I don't see how I could support including it in the rider.
What do you guys think about requiring some cost effectiveness showing as part of a request to put it in the rider? My guess is these investments are relatively cost effective compared to most of the other investments. So maybe that's one path forward, but Commissioner Goman?
I don't know if you could know right now, honestly, if it's cost effective. I'm not so sure. I mean, the technology is one thing, right? The procurement and utilization of the technology to find the leaks. In order to actually reduce greenhouse gas, the company then also has to mitigate the leaks. And so, we haven't litigated this point particularly, but it's quite possible that cost effectiveness to actually reduce greenhouse gases from the leakage involves not only kind of the detection and finding the leaks, but also the actual capital cost or O&M cost to deal with the leak, whether that's replacement or some other mitigation of it. So I'm not certain. I'm not confident the company could make a filing right now to say, this is it. It would be what actual leaks are being reduced and were those cost effective to reduce. So I'm just not certain there could be an immediate filing, to be perfectly honest with you, that could do what you're asking.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe after the first year or something like that.
That's something that's more possible. That's something that's more possible, and I guess to that extent, I share a lot of Commissioner Plant's concerns, and that's why I'm really struggling with the mismatch here of allowing rider recovery for something that arguably is not demonstrated to meet the purpose of the rider. One way it could get closer for me in meeting the purpose is if that information is all reported in a very transparent way and we have actual tracking of what leaks were found, how quickly were they mitigated, how much greenhouse gas were they emitting, and then which that were mitigated, of those mitigated, what was the cost of remediation, of the leakage. And then we would, for the first time, understand an actual kind of unit cost associated with methane leakage reduction as a potential clean heat resource. It would be a little more of a research prong, I guess, than necessarily saying we know they're cost effective. I think you could argue it's hard to get to that endpoint of saying they are or are not cost effective without that information, without that analysis. And so maybe the one way I could see leaving it in is if it gets us all that information so that we would be building in the next clean heat plan too some sort of better, much more informed determination about how these projects look from a cost effectiveness standpoint.
Oh, I love that. I strongly support that. I don't know that it's going to get you over the line, Commissioner Plant, but any further comments?
No.
I think so. Once you make up your mind, it's tough to change. Yeah. So I guess Commissioner Plant, that would be my preference. I'm just a little loath to blow up the settlement agreement. If this would blow it up, I don't really know. But and I like your sort of data-driven approach to moving forward. So what's your preference? It seems like you get to decide this one.
Talk about some of the next issues before we understand the exact fate of all the aspects of the settlement agreement as they were presented, and then we can better understand the context potentially.
All right, number 6, Mr. Mendelson.
All righty. Number 6 regards beneficial electrification and whether BE should be required beyond the Rocky Ford neighborhood, which represents less than 1% of the company's customers. And then after that, if the commission determines that BE should be expanded beyond Rocky Ford, how will it specifically budget for the BE program? The settlement places $100,000 for Rocky Ford BE pilot program and specifically restricts BE to Rocky Ford. Black Hills argued via supplemental directs that BE would cause an increase in emissions. Sweep contends those results and produced its own analysis stating BE, along with DSM, are the company's most cost-effective clean heat resources. Sweep also argues that the Commission determines BE to be among the most cost-effective clean heat resources for public service and did not limit public services BE offerings to gas-only customers. Commissioner Gilman noted that the DSM resource is rather modest, especially if limited to weatherization measures as you have done above, and cannot reasonably achieve the clean heat goals without BE. Commissioner Plant raised concerns whether Black Hills is capable of running a BE program effectively. I'll pause here for your discussion.
Yeah, I'm with Commissioner Plant on this one. I'm really nervous about these guys doing beneficial electrification. It was one thing with public service company where they had a whatever 70% overlap, but a little more nervous here, but curious to hear where you're at, Commissioner Gilman.
Sure. Well, with regard to some of the issues I brought up 2 weeks ago, I guess it was, the company's own testimony indicates the incredible difficulty, if not infeasibility, of using DSM alone, as is largely what they advocate here, to meet anywhere near the statutory targets for greenhouse gas reductions. It's fairly clear on this record, as well as in accordance with a lot of Sweep's arguments, that the utilization of beneficial electrification likely not only be necessary to get more progress past just what DSM can offer, but also may well represent one of the most cost-effective resources in order to get there. Sweep pointed out several flaws in Black Hills' analysis of beneficial electrification. They also point out that the Commission found beneficial electrification and DSM to be the most cost-effective resources to reduce emissions in public services clean heat plan. And they also included some modeling conducted by WRA, which shows BE to be the lowest cost clean heat resource available to the company. None of this was really disputed in the recommended decision, but since the settlement agreement did not include beneficial electrification, I think that's what we ended up with. And so, we're in a fairly difficult situation here. I agree with you, given Black Hills' complete reluctance or lack of interest in pursuing beneficial electrification. However, it certainly stands to reason to me that we have room under the 2.5% cost cap, especially given the restrictions that we discussed for DSM projects, to ensure that those are meeting the policy objectives of clean heat in terms of limiting those to weatherization and shell measures. I've tried on this record to determine what percent of the budget that would be freed up, and it's not there. That level of detail is not included in the record here to be able to make the determination about what that budget is. But it stands to reason to me that the company could use the remaining funding available once that DSM is pared back to what the Commission has stated to allocate to BE. I share some of your concerns. At the end of the day, I think the actual risk is in some relatively modest administrative costs. If they are not able to deliver a successful program, the money just simply won't be spent, and that will be trued up and reassessed year over year, and then certainly in the next clean heat plan. So at the end of the day, I would feel better if I felt better about it. But I don't think the risk is massive in asking them to look at expanding the BE programs that they're already planning beyond Rocky Ford to utilize what would be left of the budget, given the DSM paring down that we discussed earlier.
Probably live with that, Commissioner Plant.
Thanks. Yeah, I end up in the same place, really. I am skeptical, as I said last time, of them effectively running a BE program. But I come back to a couple of things. Number one, what Commissioner Gilman was pointing out, I was actually talking with the advisors about, okay, if we make these offerings, the rebates are offered to their customers, understanding that they're probably not going to have much promotion or marketing on behalf of the company if they aren't taken, what happens? And that was, as Commissioner Gilman said, there's a true up process, and that ultimately, customers aren't paying for something that they're not benefiting from. That's number one. Number two, we know this is cost effective as opposed to the AMLD, and it's a clean heat resource, and so it deserves to be in the portfolio. And I actually did look at how this might be distributed from a budget standpoint, albeit I didn't include the AMLD in the budgeting that I set up. But basically, just what I did was I used the total amount that was in the settlement agreement. So it falls within that 2.5% cap, and then tried to use the same distribution between DSM and BE on a percentage basis that was presented in the sweep proposal. And again, this is without that $3.5 million. I reduced the DSM to $2 million in 2025 and $2.5 million in each of 2026 and 2027. And then I had BE at $2 million in 2025, $4 million in each of 2026 and 2027. And that ratio of 7 million DSM and 10 million beneficial electrification came out to about the same percentage, albeit we have other costs in there with the renewable methane and things like that. And that would actually be different with the $3.5 million for AMLD. But that's kind of what I came up with. But then also, and I wanted to sort of propose this for your guys' consideration, one of the things in the sweep proposal was that they had no money for BE in 2025. And the reason for that is that they propose a third-party administrator, that there's an RFP issued in 2025 for a third-party administrator, and that there's a stakeholder process for evaluating that and selecting somebody who might run these programs on behalf of Black Hills, because they share some of the same concerns we have. And so if you were to do that, then, that 2 million in 2025 would be spread out in 2026 and 2027. But I wanted to just throw that out and see what your thoughts were around the sweep proposal in their answer testimony on a third-party administrator process in 2025 that would then be implemented in 2026 and 2027.
That may be a little too much surgery on the settlement agreement for me, but Commissioner Goman, where are you coming out?
I very much agree with you in spirit. It's difficult to take filings where companies argue against offering something and then give them money to offer it, and think it'll work out great. I'm with you in spirit. I somewhat agree. It might, with the chair, like it might be difficult, especially given the first time around, to make so many changes. Yeah, the ultimate success depend on it. Yeah, I think that's likely. Another route, I don't know if this is wiser or not, would be to move forward with, a modest budget. And I don't know. I think we'll have to figure out if we can really set the exact budgets here. I was a little more thinking, I struggled with the record to find much to base kind of what's left over after we pare down the DSM on and came to, it's probably going to be like a follow-up compliance filing revision of the plan based upon our decision, kind of like we asked public service for, to show what their actual plans are to comply with it. And certainly they have the calculations, they're just not in this record. So I was thinking we would probably punt the exact budgets just because I wasn't feeling like there was enough in this record to set those and feel confident enough about them. If we did that route, another option would be to express that in the next clean heat filing, we expect a third-party administrator role to be proposed, and the entire kind of process and costs around that, and kind of express our expectation that this is the direction we think it should be going without making such a major shift now. Although that may be less wise in that why not make the change before these offerings ever hit the pavement in total. I think there could be some wisdom to that approach too. So I don't know, I'm struggling in that. I very much agree with you as the end result. I think it's fairly obvious we might get the best result going that route eventually. I'm just not certain if we go that route immediately.
Commissioner Plant, anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's why I wanted to have the conversation. I thought, I think that, again, number one, we've shortened the period of this, so it gives us an opportunity to evaluate, whether or not they can be successful. Maybe that gives the Black Hills an opportunity to demonstrate that they can. What we could do is, if we wanted to stick with the same $2,000 incentive that SWEEP recommends on the beneficial electrification, and divide out that with the budget, and if the company meets those targets, then that doesn't need to be a part of their next CHP filing. But if they can't meet the targets, then it would. Something like that, I think, would be a good solution.
So you're saying if they fall short or far short of the targets, then their next application should include proposal for a third-party administrator role, and if they're kind of able to successfully deliver programming, it might not necessarily have to be.
Yeah, within a percentage, whatever it is, if they can meet 75% of the goal or whatever number, I don't know what is the right number for us to pick as a measure of success, but clearly if they're not successful, then we should find a different avenue. And so it's a matter of determining what that measure of success is.
I think that's a relatively reasonable approach. I don't know if we set an exact measure of success or just indicate that a lack of success here would lead us to explore proposals for a third-party administrator in the next clean heat plan. I don't know that I know enough right now to know what the measure of success will be. I think a lot of these programs are still new in a lot of places in the country, so it's hard to say like what is underperforming in Colorado versus the rest of the country versus, a lot of these things are new. So it might be hard for me to pick a metric right now, but I think we could express the sentiment for sure.
Well, Commissioner Gilman, I think you're in the middle on this. You want to see if you can briefly summarize what you'd like to see in order for Mr. Mendelson on the last remaining open issues, including whether we're modifying or rejecting the settlement agreement.
I'll give it a shot and then you guys can critique me, which will be a lot of fun. So my understanding of what we're doing is granting sweeps exceptions in part, as we discussed, and by doing so, modifying the recommended decision issued by the ALJ. With regard to beneficial electrification, more specifically, I think we are requiring the company to utilize the funding essentially freed up under the 2.5% cost cap, given our restrictions on DSM measures and expenditures, to utilize that for beneficial electrification offerings that extend beyond Rocky Ford, that was within their proposal. And I would expect, I think SWEET puts forth, fairly reasonable suggestions, the only in the record, about what those offerings would really be. But I would expect the company to provide a compliance filing after this. And Ms. Dundas, Mr. Mendelson, fix my language if I need it. Within this proceeding to identify the timeline and actual rebates and budgets and implementation given these adjustments. Moving forward, within that, we'd also include language somewhat with our concerns about the potential for success here, given the posture that the company's taken thus far, especially with regard to beneficial electrification, and indicate that we're very interested to measure the success of the programs going forward, and if there are significant concerns about the achievement of the programs, that we would be looking at third-party administrator options and proposals in the next Clean Heat Plan.
And then can you give us a couple sentences on advanced leak detection, monitoring leak detection?
So my suggestion, if I have a second vote, would be that we allow it within this Clean Heat Plan, but express our concerns about the potential for a mismatch and the statutory language that indicates that methane leak reduction has to be cost effective to be a clean heat resource. But the reason that it could be valuable in this initial round or Clean Heat Plan is that we simply lack some of that information to even make that determination in the future. And so in granting that expense, despite our concerns, our expectation would be clear and transparent. Those are the same thing, never mind, transparent reporting about the actual findings of the advanced leak detection, the timeline, greenhouse gas impact, and actual cost of the mitigation activities to remedy those, and that those be provided such that this can be better analyzed in the next Clean Heat Plan filing with more actual data to evaluate cost effectiveness. Moving forward.
I think that has my vote, Commissioner Plant. So I don't know if you want to try and get Commissioner Goman to modify her proposal, or if wherever you'd like to go.
Yeah, so just so I understand, I mean, I don't think I'm with you on the AMLD, but to understand, would you do that evaluation of cost effectiveness after the first year for approval in the next 2 years, or would you just wait until the next filing for a determination of cost effectiveness?
I think it would be litigated in the next Clean Heat Plan with respect to AMLD, and if it has any actual role as a clean heat resource, given the additional data that will then be available at that point in time.
Yes.
But the reason for funding it at this point would be to get any of that data at all, which I think we lack at this point in time to even understand the foundational answer to the question.
Yeah, I think I'll be in no on that. I would rather, see that money dispersed among the beneficial electrification, just because we know that that's a cost-effective resource. So I don't need to write a dissent or anything, but I can do a footnote.
Okay. Would you like to see a TBC, or are you okay with an ABC order, Commissioner Plant?
I think probably TBC is better.
Okay. Does that give you everything you need on this one, Mr. Mendelson?
I believe it does, but I just want to confirm with Ms. Dundas. But I think you answered the last question, which was how to handle this.
It's a grant in part, deny in part, and it's a modified settlement agreement.
Okay, understood.
I don't know if Ms. Dundas, if as we're trying to figure out a budget that goes along with this, whether or not we should identify certain principles and figure out what those numbers are that adhere to those principles, or if we want to, or if we're going to throw out a budget, or I don't know what's the best way to address that.
So my understanding from the deliberations this morning was that you're sticking with the total budget figure found in the settlement agreement with the same allocation for AMLD and recovered methane as approved in the settlement. I think Commissioner Gilman wanted to keep the DSM budget the same total, but that now it's a DSM BE budget with DSM money being spent on weatherization and shell measures only. And then whatever is left can be spent on BE as proposed by SWEEP, meaning the $2,000 rebates and 18% administrative overhead. So to the specifics as to what the ratio is between BE and DSM spending, you could try to set a budget now. I believe Commissioner Gilman highlighted the difficulty of understanding what that'd be on the record here. So one option would be to have the company file an updated clean heat plan. The exact attachments lost on me at the moment, but as part of their direct case, they filed a clean heat plan that's sort of a summary of the plan. And similar to public services, we had them update that to comply with the decision. And in that, I guess you could ask them for what their estimate for money left over for BE would be once they analyze how removing those rebates would affect the DSM budget.
I don't
That
think
makes
I'd be
sense.
that prescriptive, and I suspect they probably don't now. Commissioner Gilman, what do you think?
I do think they know. It's just not in the record in terms of like uptake of these shell measures versus equipment measures. It's not detailed that I've been able to find. They kind of just lump it all together, like new construction, existing construction, residential. I'd be certain they actually have data from running DSM program for years with regard to the ratio that they expected to be spent on equipment versus weatherization and shell measures. So to me, it seems feasible, and I would expect, that level of detail for us to understand what they expect to offer.
Would you like to see an updated filing as Ms. Dundas suggested and what we did in the public service company one?
I would. I think that's an easier route than us trying on this record to come up with the parsing of budget between DSM and BE. I just don't think there's enough here, but I do anticipate the company has that information as far as the breakdown of their DSM budgets in years past and could provide that in a compliance filing with updates.
Commissioner Plant, anything you'd add? So it sounds like we're going to ask for a modified filing like we did with public service company.
Yeah, if that if that works better. I didn't know if the record that we have has a breakout between DSM and BE with the SWEEP testimony, and I didn't know if we wanted to just apply that percentage to the available funds. The only other modification I think makes sense is to take out the existing Rocky Ford pilot, because we'd be doing the BE across the entire territory. So that 100,000 could get added into the overall total. But
anything to add, Commissioner Gilman? I think I like Ms. Dundas's approach.
I'd go with Ms. Dundas's approach. I kind of agree there would be maybe duplicative efforts in terms of what's going on in Rocky Ford and elsewhere, but I'm okay with just keeping that piece for now. They may have different communication, different tactics, since those are also their electric customers in that area. So I'm okay, not messing with that differentiation at this point, and would go with Ms. Dundas's approach for the updated clean heat plan filing after that provides the necessary detail.
Anything else, Commissioner Plant?
nope.
All right, it sounds like a TBC order. Anything else, Ms. Dundas, Mr. Mendelson?
Nothing from me. Thank you.
Just that settlement term 18 says they follow their compliance advice letter within 30 days of a final commission decision. So does that deadline sound good for this filing we're talking about as well? 30 days from a final decision.
That's to me, Commissioner Gellman,
Yes.
Commissioner Plant.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks to both of you for getting us through this in a quick and incisive way. Greatly appreciated, Mr. Mendelson, and thanks to both of you for the dialogue. Proceeding number 24A-0442E, Public Service Company Just Transition Plan, independent transmission consultant and procedural schedule.
Yes, good morning, Commissioners. I'm Michael Eden with your advisory staff. This morning, I'll be presenting a few matters in Public Service Company of Colorado's Electric Resource Plan, or ERP proceeding, referred to as the Just Transition Solicitation, or JTS. The first issue concerns the Independent Transmission Analyst, or ITA. After that discussion, I'll move to the proposed procedural schedule for this proceeding. So, as you'll recall, in phase 2 of the company's last ERP proceeding, the Commission saw value in staff's recommendation to implement an ITA and the JTS as a way to provide independent transmission and power flow modeling expertise among staff, the Colorado Energy Office, or CEO, and the Utility Consumer Advocate, or UCA. And going forward, I'll just refer to staff, CEO, and UCA collectively as the state agencies. The Commission stated that ideally, the ITA would assist with the modeling in phase 1 of the JTS and help identify approximate quantities of certain resource types in targeted geographic areas to test assumptions about total cost for different portfolios. On December 31st, 2024, Public Service and the state agency jointly filed in this proceeding a notice and scope of work regarding the ITA. In an earlier filing, staff stated that it was modeling the process for hiring the ITA largely based on the procurement of the independent engineer in the Colorado Power Pathway proceeding. In that proceeding, staff and the company simply filed a notice of hiring independent engineer and filed the final scope of work into the proceeding, as opposed to filing a motion for commission approval. The joint notice states that the ITA will begin working as soon as practicable, and that staff and Public Service are working to schedule interviews with potential candidates in January. Turning to the substance of the scope of work, the scope of work enumerates 3 primary tasks for the ITA. 1, supporting the state agencies in the JTS proceeding. 2, providing state agencies professional development services to build agency capacities. This includes hosting workshops on transmission planning. And then 3, supporting the state agencies in the Denver Metro CPCN case, which is proceeding number 24A-0560E. For its part, Public Service is responsible for all costs related to the work of the ITA, but is prohibited from paying any ITA invoice without staff's explicit pre-approval. The scope of work also prohibits, with limited exceptions, the ITA from communicating directly with the company without staff's pre-approval, and states that the company shall not direct the work of the ITA and shall have no authority over the content of the work. You've all been briefed on the specifics of the ITA scope of work, and I won't repeat all of the details here. Advisors and counsel see several decision points arising from the notice and scope of work regarding both the process the Commission adopts to implement the ITA and the substance of the scope of work. If you'd like, I can put forth our recommendations at this time to jumpstart your discussion on the ITA.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Substantively, advisors recommend the Commission direct 3 modifications to the ITA scope of work, as well as some additional clarifications. For the first modification, advisors note that when setting forth how the ITA will support staff's advocacy in the JTS, the scope of work specifies the ITA will help evaluate the company's base case inputs. Advisors are concerned this could unduly restrict what the ITA can evaluate, especially if it is determined that a different forecast offers more realistic inputs than the company's base case inputs. Advisors thus recommend the Commission require the scope of work be amended so that staff has discretion as to which inputs the ITA evaluates. Second, Advisors recommend that the scope of work explicitly state that the scope of the ITA's review of the company's JTS covers both the direct and the supplemental direct testimony relevant to transmission planning. While this proceeding focuses on the JTS, commissioners can also state an expectation that this would be true for the anticipated work in the Denver Metro CPCN application proceeding. Third, as part of their task to provide professional development to the state agencies, the scope of work requires the ITA to host up to 4 transmission planning workshops for the state agencies. Although the scope of work only anticipates workshops for the state agencies, advisors believe that this workshop series could be extremely valuable for advisors to better understand the fundamentals of the transmission planning process. Advisors and council therefore recommend that at least a portion of one of the workshops be conducted in a manner similar to a general training that is publicly accessible, similar to a public sim. This open portion of the ITA workshops would avoid specific aspects of any currently ongoing proceedings, but could cover general planning considerations outside of a specific docketed proceeding. At the conclusion of the open portion of the ITA workshop, the state agencies and the ITA could continue in a private format without the participation of advisors or a public recording. Advisors further recommend the Commission encourage but not require the state agencies to similarly conduct any additional ITA workshops so that advisors could participate in a portion of the workshop publicly. The Commission should direct that the publicly available workshops begin before answer testimony is filed. Workshops for state agencies or any office hours specific to the JTS or any other proceeding could, of course, be scheduled after that time. So those were the 3 modifications advisors recommend making to the ITA scope of work, but we also suggest the Commission require limited clarifications. For instance, the scope of work requires any ITA subcontractors to go through Xcel Energy's contractor screening and review process. However, there's no explanation as to what the screening and review process entails. Advisors suggest soliciting information from public service regarding this process to enhance transparency and ensure that it in no way impedes the independence of any ITA subcontractor. This information should be provided in conjunction with the final scope of work. In addition, the scope of work states that the ITA will provide up to 50 cumulative office hours for UCA and CEO. However, it's not clear to advisors whether UCA and CEO will each have 50 hours or whether UCA and CEO will each have 25 hours for a total of 50 hours. While we don't recommend the Commission direct a specific interpretation here, the Commission should simply flag this ambiguity as something the parties should consider fixing. Then the last clarification regards the budget for the ITA. The scope of work does not include an estimated budget. Omitting the estimated budget at this juncture is not surprising, given staff and public service are currently vetting several ITA candidates. But advisors recommend the Commission clarify that the estimated ITA budget must be provided in the final scope of work after the ITA is selected. Moreover, that the cost should be broken down between proceedings. The Commission should be able to evaluate the estimated cost of the ITA for this JTS proceeding. The costs associated with the Denver Metro CPCN proceeding should be included in any updated filing, but may be further noticed or evaluated separately in the Denver Metro proceeding. And then finally, procedurally, advisors recommend the Commission allow public service and the state agencies to move forward with the proposed process for implementing the ITA. Under this approach, once the scope of work is finalized and the ITA is retained, staff would file the final scope of work, incorporating any modifications or clarifications the Commission orders today. While staff should file this final scope of work as soon as it is finalized, advisors recommend the Commission require this to occur no later than February 28, 2025. This approach is largely consistent with how the Commission implemented the independent engineer in the Colorado Power Pathway proceeding and helps prevent unnecessary delays. And as I just mentioned, while the notice would be filed here, separate filings and notices may be directed through separate order if needed for specific clarifications of ITA participation in the Denver Metro CPCN proceeding.
Thank you, Mr. Eden. I strongly support the recommendations. And before turning it over to both of you for a vote, just want to go off on a bit of a brief tirade on the company's base case, what's going on here, and how it relates to a bunch of other proceedings that are just scattered around, but how this base case presents sort of a unifying vision that I'd like to see at least an alternative for exploration. So just by way of background, in its base case 20-year capital forecast, the company is proposing to spend $122 billion, of which $38 billion is on new transmission. To put this in context, the company's total rate base when I joined the PUC was $8 billion. Given this proposed level of spending, it seems critical to expand the scope of the ITA to look at other scenarios besides the company's base case. Under these circumstances, I want to talk more broadly about some concerns with the company's vision of the future as presented in its base case, as well as separate but interrelated filings involving generation, transmission, and distribution. As I understand the company's proposals, they're forecasting sizable amounts of large new customer and other load growth in the Denver metro area transmission-constrained region. At the same time, the company is also assuming that most new generation will be in the southern and eastern part of Colorado, remote from the new load. Overall, these two assumptions appear to be driving much of the $38 billion in new transmission the company claims it needs, some of which is already before us in the Denver transmission CPCNA. A third component that has begun to be litigated in multiple cases over the last 4 years is the company seems to view EVs, distributed solar, and beneficial electrification as customer choices that are not readily influenced by the regulated system, but perhaps requiring billions in new generation, transmission, and distribution spending to support. For me, as part of any PUC review of these multi-billion-dollar capital requests, I'd like to explore for rate impact capital spending and other purposes an alternative potential vision. First, I'd like to see what happens if we assume that much of the large new customer load is sited outside the Denver transmission constrained region and near the primary wind, solar, and geothermal resources. Second, the company has and appears likely to continue investing in battery energy storage. Instead of putting this new battery energy storage in remote locations by the wind and solar, like we did in the last ERP, I'd like to see what would happen if we did it in the transmission and distribution constrained locations. If we're already paying for the batteries because it may reduce the need for new natural gas CTs, let's start siting utility scale dispatchable resources in the transmission and distribution constrained areas. And we've already started down this dispatchable DG path by asking for a model RFP and contract in the JTS supplemental direct testimony. And there's other examples in Minnesota where there's a distributed capacity procurement program. Finally, this commission has already begun articulating a separate vision regarding managing customer behavior in the utilities load shape. In the TEP filing, the company presented us with a limited pilot to manage EV charging, which we expanded by a factor of 5 without even knowing the extent of the proposed new transmission and distribution spending, which is now just showing up. I'm wondering if we should have increased that managed charging by something like a factor of 10 or 20. Similarly, regarding distributed solar, DSM, and beneficial electrification, the company seemed to focus more on energy and far less on reducing peak demand during the critical 200 hours or so that appear to be driving much of the new capital need. I view customer behavior as being highly amenable to influence in ways that can greatly reduce critical hour peak demands in generation, transmission, and distribution capital spending, not raise it. As such, I think it is critical to be able to look at transmission alternatives beyond the company's base case. For purposes of phase one of the JTS, we've already started going down this road through the supplemental direct testimony, asking the company to evaluate a lower low scenario. I look forward to the coming discussion and greatly appreciate the work to get to an ITA to support the JTS and perhaps other proceedings. In sum, I believe we need to fully analyze the rate, capital investment, and other impacts of an alternative vision to the company's base case that locates new load near generation, that places dispatchable generation at scale in transmission and distribution constrained areas, and seeks to much more aggressively manage customer usage and load shapes to reduce peak. Look at alternative transmission scenarios is one step in this process. So anyway, just a frustration with how the generation, transmission, and distribution is looked at in separate dockets, how the load shape is not consistently managed to seek to lower spending, and just wanted to get that frustration in front of you. And maybe, I don't know how much we can do here today and now, but see if there's a time where we can put on the agenda an opportunity to discuss how these proceedings all fit together, and how we address these core issues about where we're heading, not just in individual dockets, but across a series of them. So with apologies, Commissioner Gilman, any reaction to that, or just feel free to follow up on Mr. Eden's recommendation.
I sign on to the tirade, and
the tirade has another vote.
must be the giver of the tirade. No, look, I totally agree. I think as you look across proceedings right now, we're looking at an astounding, unprecedented amount of expected capital expenditures by the utility, and it's difficult to understand, I think, at this point, if their vision aligns with our vision of really using all of the available tools to optimize on these expenses for ratepayers. It's not immediately evident that that is what's going on. And so I certainly agree with you in trying to be more strategic and use whatever tools and procedural avenues we have available to ensure that we can take a wider lens and kind of be informed across these proceedings. First and foremost, at a minimum, ensuring we have consistent information across proceedings, which has been an issue in the past. But second, to really be able to vet in a timely way that influences all of the different components. Are these the right assumptions to be making? Have we kind of utilized all of the best available tools to ensure that we're minimizing the cost for ratepayers over the long term? So like with regard to the ITA specifically, I support Mr. Eden's additions, before I forget to say that. But also, I really want to emphasize, especially to kind of the state agencies who would have access to this resource in the ITA, to keep your eye on the prize, which to me is to really fundamentally try to integrate the planning and expectation for transmission expenses with our expectation for generation, as you were discussing, Chair, to look at the benefits of how much generation where at what points in time, and really understand how we can minimize the transmission expense through our choices with generation. And, ideally we get to something like a proxy value for a credit for locating certain types and quantities of resources in certain geographic areas, so that we can properly attribute the value that those bring to the system in saving expenses elsewhere while we are in the silo of generation. It's a difficult thing to do, but I think it's possible. And I just want to emphasize to those parties with the ITA arrangement that, to me, that should be a large part of the goal, right? The goal is optimizing around all of these expenses at once, but we need to look at how do we get at the end of phase one to a tool that gets us there for phase two. And to me, I think the company has recommended, a credit kind of to certain resource types or locations. And I think we'll want to look at that sort of strategy and what would be an appropriate kind of proxy value. And if we can establish such a thing in phase one, it needs to be super transparent to all of the bidders. So everyone has the right information to understand how different resources may be viewed kind of in different areas, with the end goal of really limiting this overall expense that includes all these other components that are so difficult to manage in just this proceeding. So I would say that first and foremost, like related to the ITA. The other thing I wanted to mention, I think that public service distribution system plan is next on the agenda. So I was going to bring this up then, but you kind of led me straight into it. With regard to the really profound kind of overlap of inputs that will go into each of these different proceedings, and the massive dollar values at stake in every one of them. Forecasting certainly comes up to me as something that is, we're looking at really unprecedented levels that the company is putting in front of us of their expectations of both load and capacity growth moving forward. And so I think in the DSP, the company suggested a technical conference could be available to look at like the longer term rate impacts. I'll probably take them up on that offer, but try and figure out how we use a technical conference in a combined way across, at least right now, the JTS and the DSP, potentially even the Denver Metro transmission, to look at what are the foundational forecasting assumptions being made here? What are the options, as you say, in terms of load control and flexibility to smooth that out and to make sure we're operating the system in the most intelligent way possible, not just saying, well, all the loads pile on top of each other at the exact same time, and this is what we end up with. And so what I'd suggest that we, and this is both a DSP thing and a JT thing, is that we ask advisors and counsel to reserve us a date, ideally very early March, to have a technical conference, primarily based on forecasting, but potentially to some degree the long-term rate impacts issue as well, so that we can dig into this and potentially notice it across each of these proceedings, because it should be the same forecast that we're talking about, and it's just incredibly inefficient to be kind of litigating the same exact things in every single one. And if we can get a solid understanding at the onset of these proceedings together in one forum about a lot of the bases of this forecasting that's driving so much of the investment, I think that would benefit us a great deal in kind of starting ourselves off on the right foot in terms of this coordination across proceedings that you were talking about. So that would be one suggestion for kind of a first step in a very foundational piece that's driving this investment.
Yeah, it's not accidental that the tirade was before our DSP discussion. So I I think the first discussion we'll have in the DSP that I'd like to raise is on the long-term rate impact, and I couldn't agree with you more that trying to build separate records in two different cases is not only inefficient but may lead us to really more expensive, needlessly expensive outcomes. So, Commissioner Plant, anywhere you'd like to go?
Well, first of all, I support the recommendation. I support the tirade. Tirades? I don't know. Is it plural? And
I don't know if it's plural or not. I'm not going to characterize Commissioner Gilman's comments.
The only other thing I'd add that I would like to see the ITA address is if there are alternatives basically to an increase in transmission expense, what sort of targets the commission should be looking at? Is it increasing the load factor in a distribution zone that would, reduce the need for million worth of transmission? Or is it, generation capacity within the distribution system that would, at a certain level, a certain capacity that would then negate the need for some other upgrade? Those are the kinds of things that I feel like we just don't get that information around, and it intuitively, it seems like there should be something there, but we don't ever get that information, so we can't make a good decision based on it. And so that's really one of the key things additional that I'd like to see the ITA evaluating.
So I guess maybe there's I don't know that what I outlined needs to be in this order. It was more communicating with among us and the parties, but maybe as Commissioner Plant suggests, we can add some language to this order, talking about the need to build out our ability to do transmission planning, particularly beyond, particularly including, sort of load shape and various opportunities to influence load shape. And also, as Commissioner Gilman suggested, around different types of generation and different types of locational generation. So this is in addition to just helping us in the JTS, it's long-term capacity building. So I don't know, anything else you'd say for Mr. Eden as he drafts this order? Nope. All right, I think that piece, well, we're not to the order yet. Why don't we go to the procedural schedule?
Right, and just to clarify, this will be kind of the additional topics that Commissioner Plant and everybody else brought up would be to highlight for the parties, the state agencies, and the ITA to investigate and put a particular focus on those issues.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to bring this back to a February CWM and just have the three of us, with help from advisors and counsel, sort of brainstorm about how we better integrate the records and the thinking across all these cases. It's just, we can do better. I think. And I'd just like to have that conversation. And this is, framing the conversation up so we can have a productive conversation, say, like third week in February, maybe before the technical conference that Commissioner Gilman mentioned. So something to frame that up, get us all together, and give guidance to the parties across all these cases.
Okay. Yeah, in advisors, I think that initially, going back a step, I guess, advisors heard Commissioner Gilman's request, and we can plan on coming back to the commission in the next few weeks for an opportunity to discuss a technical conference and scheduling that in early March, preferably, and having that so it can cover multiple proceedings, not just the JTS or not just the DSP. So we can continue that conversation in coming weeks.
Cool.
Okay. Well, moving to the procedural schedule then. Last Friday, Public Service filed a notice of conferral and unopposed motion to modify supplemental direct testimony deadline and request for waiver of response time. We'll just shorten that to notice. This notice was filed pursuant to decision number C24-0941, in which the commission required the company to confer further with the parties on a procedural schedule, including conferral with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, or CDPHE, regarding whether it could provide a neutral verification review pursuant to section 40-2-125.5, subsection 7. The commission also scheduled a pre-hearing conference for January 23rd, 2025. In the notice, the company puts forth a consensus procedural schedule, which it states no parties oppose. I won't repeat every deadline, but the proposed schedule includes an April 18th deadline for answer testimony, a May 23rd deadline for rebuttal and cross-answer testimony, a June 5th settlement deadline, and several days of evidentiary hearing beginning on June 10th, 2025. The consensus procedural schedule also proposes a February 21st deadline for supplemental direct testimony. Public Service acknowledges that earlier in decision C24-0956, the Commission had directed Public Service to file supplemental direct testimony by January 31st. After reviewing all the directives for supplemental direct testimony, however, Public Service states it cannot meet this deadline. The company expressly asks for an extension of this January 31st deadline and notes that none of the parties oppose the February 21st deadline proposed in the consensus schedule. The company additionally notes that to accommodate this procedural schedule, the parties agreed to modify the discovery procedures such that there is a 5 business day deadline to respond to discovery served on the company's rebuttal testimony and any intervener cross-answer testimony. Public Service also states it has conferred with CDPHE and staff about a neutral verification review. Staff and Public Service have agreed that CDPHE should verify the base portfolio for Phase 1 and all presented portfolios in Phase 2. If CDPHE agrees to this role, the company and staff will provide a verification date for the Phase 1 portfolio through a supplemental notice filing. Finally, Public Service requests the Commission waive response time to the notice under Rule 1308C. The company notes the notice is unopposed. So there's several procedural decisions before the Commission. If you like, I could again present a series of recommendations on a path forward.
I think we'd like to hear the recommendations.
Right. Advisors are pleased that the parties worked out a consensus procedural schedule, but recommend the Commission make certain modifications. First, advisors are concerned that a settlement deadline of Thursday, June 5th does not provide the Commission sufficient time to review any settlement prior to the start of the hearing on Tuesday, June 10th. Advisors recommend the Commission change the settlement deadline to Monday, June 2nd at 12 p.m. Not only will this provide the Commission additional time to review any settlement, the Commission could discuss at the June 4th CWM whether it needs to modify the start of the evidentiary hearing due to any settlement or stipulation filings made earlier that week. We recommend clarifying that testimony supporting any settlement filing would also be filed on the settlement and stipulation deadline of June 2nd at 12 p.m. Or, if no testimony can be filed by that date, we recommend Public Service file a request to vacate certain hearing dates or move the start of the hearing, together with an explanation of when settlement testimony can be submitted. In addition, the consensus schedule does not include a deadline for submission of a witness list and cross-examination matrix. Advisors recommend the Commission set a May 30th, 2025 deadline for these items. As for the revised supplemental direct deadline, advisors recommend the Commission grant the company's request and adopt the proposed February 21st deadline, which is unopposed. And then I have a few more what I'd call cleanup procedural recommendations, but I'll pause here for your vote on the procedural schedule, including advisors' proposed modifications and the company's request to extend the deadline for supplemental direct testimony.
So thank you, Mr. Eden. I'd echo your comment and greatly appreciate the parties coming together on a consensus procedural schedule and support your recommendations, but just want to clarify one thing as part of our written order approving the procedural schedule and the supplemental direct deadline extension. And that is that the company will provide an alternative transmission investment scenario based on the lower load forecast. Currently, the JTS transmission study submitted as part of the company's direct testimony includes power flow analysis using both the company's base and low load forecast. As part of the supplemental direct requirement to provide a lower load forecast, it has always been my expectation that the company will provide updated transmission analysis on this forecast. And I'd just like to make sure with the extension today, we are clear in our expectation that this alternative transmission investment scenario will be included in the February 21st supplemental direct filings. If the company needs additional time, as always, it can confer with the parties and request that a small piece of this analysis be provided later. But given the company's representation earlier in this proceeding that most of the supplemental direct testimony could be filed as early as January 31st, I'm not seeing a huge reason for further delay. So that's the one clarification I'd request, is that in addition to the lower low load forecast, they also clarify that we'd like to see what that does to the transmission investment levels. So Commissioner Gilman, thoughts on that or any of Mr. Eden's recommendations?
I agree with all Mr. Eden's recommendations as well as your clarification.
Commissioner Plant?
I do as well.
Mr. Eden, final cleanup?
Great, yeah, so the cleanups first, in order to accommodate the party's proposed schedule, the additional time permitted under section 40-6-109.5, part 1, will be required in this proceeding. Advisors thus recommend extending the decision deadline in this proceeding by the permitted 130 days allowed by statute. Also, advisors see no issue with the parties' agreement to adopt modified procedures for discovery served on the company's rebuttal testimony and on any intervener cross-answer testimony. We recommend the Commission acknowledge this agreement in its decision. Advisors likewise agree with CDPHE's scope of participation as proposed by staff and public service, and the commitment to submit a supplemental notice filing. In addition, per the company's request, advisors recommend the Commission waive response time to the January 17th notice under Rule 1308C. Regarding the mechanics of the evidentiary hearing to ensure the efficient administration of the remote hearing, advisors recommend the Commission adopt its standard procedures for using the Zoom platform for participating in the evidentiary hearing and for the electronic submission of hearing exhibits. And then finally, advisors recommend the Commission vacate the pre-hearing conference set for tomorrow, January 23rd. We recommend issuing a short separate order today, vacating pre-hearing conference, and the remainder of your decision.
Did you guys miss the end of Mr. Eden's?
Commissioner Gilman?
Did he break up for you guys at all?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. Oh, I thought that was me.
Yeah, I figured you thought it was yours. Just why you were
Mr. Eden, I don't know, I'm guessing like the last paragraph or something or so. The last 4 or 5 sentences you were pretty frozen.
Sorry about that. Am I better now?
Yeah, I think the last thing was vacating the pre-hearing conference. So
yeah, that's one of the important things is to vacate the pre-hearing conference. That's currently scheduled for tomorrow. We recommend doing that in a separate decision, and then we can capture the rest of the discussion today in a follow-on decision later this week or early next week.
Commissioner Gutman?
Yes, I agree.
Commissioner Plant?
I agree as well.
As do I, and I think that can be 2 separate ABC decisions, Mr. Eden.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Why don't we take a 5-minute break, come back at 10:35 and continue with the DSP. Does that work for you too? All right, 10:35. Mr. Mendelson, Ms. Dundas, proceeding number 24A-0547E, Public Service Company of Colorado Distribution System Plan. Mr. Mendelson.
Yes, good morning again, commissioners. The horses left the barn a little bit here, but as a brief background on this case, on December 16th, Public Service filed with the Commission its second distribution system plan, which represents a 5-year forecast of distribution-related investment needs across 13 planning regions. It also includes a new rider mechanism, the Grid Modernization Adjustment Clause, or GMAC, to facilitate cost recovery. As a quick background, there are 2 key pieces of legislation relevant to the filing, SB 19236 and SB 24218. The latter statute requires Public Service as a qualifying retail utility to, among other things, identify hosting capacity to meet new loads and distributed energy resources, file a DSP which presents at least 2 future planning scenarios and corresponding investments, and include detailed mapping of the hosting capacity with appropriate safeguards to protect infrastructure. Also worth mentioning, the company filed its inaugural DSP plan in 2022 under proceeding number 22A0189E. That proceeding terminated in a comprehensive settlement, which included an array of its own requirements for the incident application. The current DSP suggests incremental spending over the 2025 to 2029 plan period of roughly $4.9 billion, or nearly $1 billion per year. When combined with wildfire mitigation, transportation, electrification, and other distribution capital projects being litigated through other applications, total distribution spending over the plan period is projected at nearly $7.6 billion, or roughly $1.5 billion per year. To put that value in perspective, the company spent $567 million on total distribution investments in 2023. The largest categories of spending proposed under the DSP are asset health and reliability, capacity, mandates, and new business. The plan will build out 35 new substations from a current value of 152, expand substation banks by 39% from the current value of 278, and add over 300 new feeder distribution lines. Much of the company's plan is based on its projected customer of the future, which it calculates is causing an average household peak consumption of 16 kilowatts, up from a current value of 5 kilowatts due to the addition of electric space heating, water heating, cooking, and 2 EVs in the average garage. This shift in consumption pattern causes significant changes in the company's overall peak usage from 6,500 megawatts in the summer to 12,000 megawatts peak load in the winter by 2032. The company employed 2 modeling exercises, the load SEER model it runs internally, and the longer-term Grid of the Future study conducted by consultant Kavala, where 4 separate model runs based on different expectations of customer technology adoption were simulated. The company evaluated non-wires alternatives and has included in its filing an NWA model contract and solicitation document. However, the company does not suggest its proposed investment may be mitigated based on the outcomes of any NWA solicitation. At last week's CWM, the Commission decided to toll its completeness decision under Commission Rule 1303C and Rule 3528B. Chair Blank raised several completeness-related questions to be potentially requested of the company prior to the Commission's completeness determination, as well as questions he would like to ask as a request for supplemental direct testimony. Those were shared in writing with Commissioners Kilman and Plant, so I'll just paraphrase those below. Depending on any determination of completeness today, advisors and counsel will also prompt the Commission to vote on whether to hear the application en banc or refer to an ALJ, interventions requested and of right from a total of 15 entities, whether to set response time to the company's motion for extraordinary protection, whether to order a technical conference and supplemental direct testimony, and whether to set a procedural schedule for what that may look like. Chair Blank's first request was to produce a rate impact evaluation for all customers paying the TCAD charge for all residential customers only, with specific allocation methods incorporated, and with the load forecast that has been used to develop the DSP plan overall in this proceeding. His second request was with respect to load shape. There, before a determination of completeness can be made, he requests for a more complete picture of 8760 hourly loads in an executable file that includes both historic data from 2024 and projected loads for 5-year periods from 2030 to 2045 for residential customers, all customers who pay the TCAD charge, and all customers broadly. The chair's third request is to provide 5 years of historical data to figure ES5 and table KABD1. Advisors also suggest several questions that we've distributed to the Commission to facilitate the evaluation of completeness and that may be asked as supplemental directs. If the Commission is interested in asking the advisor suggested questions as part of your completeness evaluation, I could read those into the record. I'll pause here for your discussion.
Yeah, let's see if we can take these up sequentially. And as Mr. Mendelson said, and as we discussed last week, there's multi-billion-dollar potential increase in rate base associated with this filing. And I just think we need to understand the long-term rate impact. I think it's probably the central issue in the case, and there's very limited information on it. So as we discussed last week, I'd like to ask for a 20-year rate impact analysis in an executable format based on the following assumptions. First, I'd request that the gross capital spending projections be taken from the JTS testimony, hearing Exhibit 101, attachments JWI 5, the revenue requirement sheet, which, as we talked about, includes $122 billion of total capital spending over 20 years, of which $40 billion is for new distribution. Second, I'd like to see a revenue requirement for all customer classes that are currently paying for the TCAD, and then a separate one solely for the residential class. So 2 separate rate impact forecasts based on these 2 revenue requirements and distribution level customer classes. Third, in allocating T&D investment to the individual distribution customer class revenue requirements over 20 years, I'd ask the company to assume that the 4CP-AED T&D cost approach that was approved in the 2023 Phase 2 electric rate case be used. Fourth, in calculating the customer class allocators for the revenue requirement, I'd request that the company use the same load forecasts that have been used to support the base case request in this proceeding, which should also match the load forecast in the base case of the JTS. Likewise, for the denominator of the rate calculation, I'd ask that the company use annual residential and total TCAD customer usage based on the load forecast in this case. And I guess the fear is that 100% of the distribution costs are going to be on residential and other smaller customers, and the way we allocate transmission costs is going to place much of those costs on residential and other distribution customers. So for me, the rate impact analysis in the JTS case doesn't get us what we need, which is what are the long-term rate impacts of all this spending on smaller residential and distribution customers. So that's the first request for supplemental regarding completeness. So Commissioner Gilman, thoughts, comments, adjustments, anywhere you'd like to go?
No, I agree with you. With respect to this, I don't have much to add, but think this, as well as a few of the others, are important aspects to gain an understanding as to if the application is complete, so that we can ensure we really properly have the information we need to kick off this proceeding.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I agree with those recommendations, and would also ask that there be a clarification by the company in terms of where they are in with regard to compliance with the VPP decision that the Commission issued last year. It appears to me that they're not in compliance with the decision in terms of the first phase of the VPP implementation. And part of the concern around that is that the time frame for that was designed so that we would gain data during the 24-25 winter season that could be then applied to the next DSM filing. And it's unclear to me whether or not the company has complied with that provision of the decision, and whether or not we will have that information for the next DSM filing. So if they could address the components which are in compliance with the order that came out of the commission last year, that would be helpful.
And you'd like to make that part of the completeness determination?
Yeah, I think it's necessary to know where they are in terms of compliance with the order to determine whether or not the application is complete.
I'm okay with that, Commissioner Goman.
Yes.
Okay. The second, Mr. Mendelson, you might mute as you're taking notes. Your screen is flashing. Thank you. The second issue for completeness, we also discussed last week the need for a more complete picture of the hourly load forecast and shape. In his direct testimony, as Mr. Mendelson pointed out, Mr. Eiley shows household peak consumption more than tripling from 5 kW to 16 kW. This is a very large shift, which I'm just struggling to understand. To help us better understand what's going on and its impact on capital spending, I'd like to separately request an executable format in 8,760 hourly matrix and a summary 12 by 24 averaging loads in each hour in each month for 3 classes. The residential class, the classes that comprise the TCAD customers, and for all retail customers for calendar year 2024. I'd also like to see the 8760 and 12 by 24 load cast used to support the distribution investment proposal for each of these customer class groupings in 2030, 2035, 2040, and either 2044 or 2045. So that's a total of 15 matrices, 3 classes across 5 years. I think we also need to unpack the company's assumptions to do this for each of these 4 forecast years, and for the 3 customer class groupings. I'd like the company to provide additional 8,760 and 12 by 24 matrices that break out the load associated with beneficial electrification, behind the meter solar, EVs, and the rest. As such, I'm asking the company to back out the growing load from each category from the requested matrices and to present the resulting revised forecasted matrices. The sum of the 4 parts of each customer class forecast should be equal to the first set of overall customer class forecasts for each hour presented. And I want to be able to isolate the impact of these usage assumptions on the load forecasts. Commissioner Goman, and I think it's any comments on that? It's separate matrices, 8760, 12 by 24 for 3 customer class groupings, 4 forecast years, and 4 categories of load. And this gets to Commissioner Plant's concern about the load shape we're using everywhere. And this is the core data I'm hoping to see to understand it, what they're doing, let alone how we might change it for an alternative capital run. So Commissioner Gilman, are you okay asking for this?
Yeah, and I certainly could see why that's necessary information. The other thing I'm struggling with in looking at this, kind of the company's vision of the average household and changes therein. It could be difficult if all we get is information that is at this aggregate level, to really kind of level set and understand, is that a reasonable assumption? So one perhaps addition to consider is to also have the load shape disaggregated for kind of this expected average residential customer and to show the end uses broken out in there so that we
Like
can
for a sample cut for like one customer
well, I mean,
or
it
the
stands to reason
sample.
that the actual forecast is just you take some base assumptions on behavior of certain people and multiply it by how many you think are doing this or that or whatever it is. And so whatever the company's vision of what this average customer looks like, I think it will be more tangible and understandable to see some of this information disaggregated for that average customer and then disaggregated by end use for those different hours so that we can understand especially what they anticipate the behavior of the equipment, the electrified loads to be, to what degree the company anticipates any load management being involved in this, as well as an indication by the company as to the number and percentage of single family and multifamily homes that they expect to have these certain types of equipment, to really allow us to understand at a foundational level, how is this forecast being built? I think it's nice and it's fine to see it at the customer class level, but it may be more difficult to interpret that information than to understand at a more foundational level, what is this base house? Show us the disaggregated end use loads, and to what degree, if any, you're anticipating load management, as well as how do you build the forecast? What is your 25-year projection of the adoption of each of these certain end use technologies within the residential customer class to get you to what's shown as the forecast? To me, that provides kind of more foundational information that will help us, better assess it. In addition, I think the customer class information is fine. It just, this information may be more approachable and understandable to understand how do we actually build to that customer class forecast.
Yeah, I mean, I'm focused on trying to figure out an alternative to manage the capital spending, but I think even to get to the aggregated numbers, like you say, we're going to have to get to something that's more understandable. So I strongly support that. And I'll just turn it to Commissioner Plant, see if you have anything to add. And then maybe Mr. Mendelson, I know you had a bunch of detailed questions that sort of get at Commissioner Gilman's concerns about understanding what's going on at the sample household level. But let me turn it to Commissioner Plant, see if he has anything to add. Then I'll turn it back to you, Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of the recommendations. I think that information is really essential. I mean, sort of like you, Mr. Chairman, I was looking at I think they call it the grid of the future or customer of the future or something like that. I'm not sure when that future is. I don't know if it's 2050 or with everybody's got two EVs in their garage and everybody's got all that sort of stuff. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable vision, but I think we're making an assumption that over the next 25 years there's no improvement in technology at all, and we're going to plan for if we waved our wand today and all of a sudden everybody was that customer of the future. I think that this is an iterative process, and so getting that hourly data for the next, I think you said 4 years or within
increments, 5-year increments.
5-year increments within the next, the planning horizon, I think is an important component, just to sort of, level set on what it is we're planning for, whereas, where things will improve in terms of technology over time.
So I know, Mr. Mendelson, you had a bunch of questions that either for completeness or supplemental direct. Should I just do my last one on completeness and then come back to you?
Sure, that makes sense.
Right. And the last one was on historical spending. I just like to see the prior 5 years of history in the same category so we can see how they're altering their spending from the historical baseline. Would you be okay with that request, Commissioner Gilman?
I am.
Commissioner Plant?
Yes.
All right, those were my three things for completeness. You want to outline? Well, let me just go to Commissioner Gilman. Is there anything else you had for completeness before I turn to Mr. Mendelson?
No.
Commissioner Plant?
No, not beyond what I've already said.
All right, Mr. Mendelson, and I don't know whether you want this for completeness or for supplemental direct.
Well, we could discuss it. I would personally recommend it for completeness. I think it'll help in what the commission's trying to accomplish.
All right.
But advisors have come up with the following. The first one is to get at the technology adoption curves embedded in the forecast, as Commissioner Gilman referenced. Figure ES1 indicates average household peak electric consumption will triple from 5 kilowatts to 16 kilowatts over the projection period. With respect to that conclusion, please provide all supporting spreadsheets and analysis in executable format, if not already on the record. Indicate the extent to which the company will apply load management activities and the associated mitigation of coincident use due to such load managed activities for loads associated with separately EVs, air source heat pumps, and hot water heat pumps. Indicate by number and percentage of single family and multifamily households separately in public services service territory, the 10-year historic adoption rate and 25-year projection of future adoption of households that have standard ASHPs, cold climate ASHPs, hot water heat pumps, 1 EV, 2 EVs, rooftop solar, battery storage, incorporated in the company's and Cavala's scenario forecasts. And finally, confirm that this average household peak load is consistent with the goal-aligned scenario in figure ES2 and the proposed investment level as proposed as GMAC portion of distribution capital budget in table JWI date T5. The second question advisors propose gets at the issue of managed charging. SB 24218 at section 5C1 requires a QRU to present at least 2 future planning scenarios. Section 5C2 indicates that at least one scenario should include load and managed generation flexibility. The commission understands Cavala included 50% and 100% managed charging in its long-term goal-aligned scenario. Nonetheless, please explain if the company complied with these requirements for the 5-year DSP plan and how your analysis incorporated into your DSP plan. Specifically, what system upgrades are being reduced via the implementation of load and managed generation flexibility? What is the system cost savings and cost benefit ratio of your managed loads and generation attributes? Why did Cavala limit managed charging to the goal-aligned scenario? Is it possible to incorporate managed charging to the policy aligned or other scenarios evaluated by Cavala? Please explain why the Cavala forecasts as presented in figure ES4 do not cross the DSP baseline until approximately 2030 or later. Is this because the Cavala forecasts included different technology adoption rates than the company? Please provide all data to support differences between the company's and Cavala's forecasts. And finally, the last question set has to do with the current status of the distribution system. We asked the company to refer to their February 12, 2024 presentation in proceeding number 23M 0464EG that was titled Overview of the Distribution System Constraints, Solutions, and Opportunities. We asked them please update the presentation using 2024 data or the latest 12 months if full year 2024 data is not available. In particular, the commission seeks updated data for pages 11 through 13. That's where they indicated overloads in feeders and banks. Regarding the data indicating feeders and banks were overloaded in 2023, indicate how many of these incidences led to loss of load, equipment failure, or other negative consequences. Please explain how a feeder and bank separately can operate above its rating and the associated impacts on equipment life. Please provide supporting data. And for each of the last 5 years, please indicate the number of substations, banks, and feeders the company has installed in its service territory.
Commissioner Gellman?
Thanks, Mr. Mendelson. Yeah, I'm supportive of your questions as well. Just a couple brief clarifications, additions. In the first question, looking at the assumption of adoption of different technologies in households, I would just add two things or clarifications to your list of technologies. One is ground source heat pumps, widely understood to deal with a lot of the biggest peaking concerns that we have on both systems. So I think it's important to understand the company's assumptions around adoption of that technology. As well, you list out air source heat pumps, and I think it's to be determined if most customers utilize the backup source of heat for their air source heat pumps, but to the degree they do, it would be important to understand the company's assumptions around what portion of those, either standard or cold climate air source heat pumps, are backed up by electric resistance heat versus gas, as that would have a difference as to which system sees the peaking impact of that customer. So just kind of some clarifications on the technology list there, if you will.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
I believe it does. Would
Okay.
I don't know if I could fit it all in one sentence, but we'll find a way to
It's
include.
going to get long because there's different categories depending on the backup. But that's the important differentiation we need to understand, right? A customer who's hitting at electric resistance peak versus moving to the gas system has a very different look for either of those systems. So it's important to understand the projections the company's using with regard to how many they expect to go down which pathway. The only other thing considering might be helpful to understand for your third question with regard to the overloaded equipment. The company has suggested both in their filing as well as in different, kind of live discussion that they expect to become winter peaking, perhaps inside of a decade. It's unclear to me if the company is taking into consideration at all any potential changes in capacity of the equipment based upon ambient temperature, if they are peaking at a different time of year with a far different ambient temperature than they're peaking at now with regard to substations, wiring, transformers, whatever it may be. To my understanding, a lot of this equipment is based upon ambient temperature and consideration of its capacity that it's operating at. And I'm just curious if the company is adjusting or making any considerations if they expect to become winter peaking with regard to the actual available capacity of equipment they're planning under the ambient temperature condition they're expecting their new peak to occur.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
I'm good with that. Commissioner Plant, anything to add?
I have nothing more to add. Thanks.
All right, so that really robust completeness requirement, but it's a massive multi-billion-dollar request, so I'm good with this. Mr. Mendelson, Ms. Dundas.
Yes, well, I know that Chair Blank and advisors also proposed supplemental directs. We could put those at least into today's meeting, just so the company is on notice, or hold off.
I can summarize mine really briefly. The
Chair,
first, yeah, go ahead, Ms. Dundas.
before you do that, could I just actually suggest one more for completeness? So just one clarification and then one suggestion. So to confirm the information you're seeking today that's already been discussed, so that's why I want to do this before we get into supplemental direct, is information you're seeking pursuant to Rule 1303, which allows the commission, if it finds that more information is necessary before deeming the application complete, to issue a decision identifying that information. Is that what you understand you're doing here today?
Yes, Commissioner Gellman.
Yeah.
Commissioner Plant.
So then the commission will determine completeness after it receives this information. So we should talk about a deadline for that. And then just one suggestion is that as raised in mission data as motion for intervention, as well as in the advisor's review of the filing, you'll notice that proceeding 23A 0471E was tabled today. But that's mission data's triple R in the matter of the application of public service to implement delivery of 1 second timestamped electric usage data. So again, in their motion and in our review, advisors couldn't determine if the company has complied with the directives in decision C240815 in that proceeding. So I'd suggest for your consideration also asking in the completeness order for the company to specify more specifically where it complies with that decision, including the directives in paragraphs 45 to 49, and if not currently in the filing, to provide such.
Commissioner Goman,
I agree.
Commissioner Plant,
I agree.
as do I.
And then I'll just leave you with that setting a deadline for this before going in supplemental direct probably makes sense.
Do you have a suggestion?
Mr. Mendelson?
We were considering February 14th. That would give the company a little over 3 weeks to comply, and hopefully we can get the order out before the end of this week. So that would give them 3 weeks with the written description of the questions.
Commissioner Goman,
Yeah, I agree.
Commissioner Plant,
Agree.
as do I. And just really briefly, I'll summarize my 3 requests. It seems if the company is proposing to base its distribution investment on a goal of limiting the loading of individual feeders and other equipment to 75% of the applicable ratings. On this issue, I'd like to know if the company is aware of any other utility in the US or the world that is undertaken a similar approach. And I'd like to see the capital spending forecast, assuming that 75 constraint was relaxed under 3 different scenarios to 84%, 92%, and 100%, and trying to identify which projects drop out in each planning region as the constraint is relaxed. And then second, I'd like to see a lower low load forecast. But before making a request on that forecast, I'd like to see the load shape data consistent with our requests so we can see if we want a modified load shape with a lower load. And then the last thing is my understanding is that the company has spent over $600 million in advanced metering infrastructure. I'd like to request a narrative description explaining how this data is being used in the distribution planning process. I don't understand why we're relying solely on a probabilistic approach to forecasting demand when we have actual data down to the individual customer and feeder level. So the question is, more specifically, does the company's ADMS communicate directly with and incorporate the AMI data at all, let alone in real time? And if not, wouldn't this be a reasonable first step before we commit billions of dollars based on a probabilistic approach that doesn't seem to include the actual data? So any comments on those 3 things, Commissioner Gilman? I think we talked about them last week, and I think you had some materials in writing.
Yeah, no, I'm supportive of those generally, and I would say more generally for supplemental direct. I'd probably prefer if we bring this back and refine it. Before that, I can only prepare for so much in a certain day. And so I'm just not there on knowing exactly, kind of the comprehensiveness of the list that we want to issue. And I think to a large degree, we'll have to see what we get back on those completeness questions. But I'm generally supportive of those directions, but don't have anything to add myself today, as I'll just need some more time to look into it more.
Yeah, maybe we'll keep the supplemental direct out of this order, Mr. Mendelson, and just stand on the oral conversation. So I don't know. Do you have anything else to add, Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing one of the things that I'm really interested in is how the company is evaluating demand management within their capacity analysis, or whether or not they're just cumulatively adding up the potential demand on a feeder, for example, and then looking at a capital improvement to size that capacity to an unmanaged demand, or whether or not they are assuming a certain level of capacity that can be addressed through the management of the demand in the system that they're designing. And I'd like to get some more information around that, as well as one of the things that I think you're kind of getting at as well, in terms of the load shape, whether or not within the application of their VPP vision, they have some sort of a target load factor increase that they're trying to achieve, and as they're designing their system, and with the objective of making the distribution system more efficient. What is the metric? Is it a percentage increase in load factor? Is it some sort of a capacity percentage that's being addressed? Is it, what exactly is the performance metric that they're targeting as they're designing their system?
Well, I support that. Any comments on that, Commissioner Gellman? All right, Mr. Mendelson, let's unless you have something burning, I think it's probably best to take up the rest later. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, of course.
All right.
So we have, I believe, like 6 questions with subcomponents for determination of completeness that we're asking the company to file by February 14th. And we will order today that we're going to delay that decision of completeness until we have a chance to look at the data that's presented in response to these questions.
Yep. And I think that can be an ABC order, Ms. Dundas. Anything else before we leave?
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick note that the agenda had included all the interventions and motions on it, but because we're delaying the determination of completeness, those will be taken up when completeness is determined. So just noting that we're tabling all of those, even though they were on the agenda.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks, guys. Proceeding number 23M-0013EG. Ms. Crandall, Ms. McLaughlin. It's been a long wait, Ms. Crandall.
This should be pretty fast, Commissioners. Good morning. I'm Kelly Crandall with the advisory team, and I'm here to discuss a proceeding that was opened as a repository for reports and evaluations related to the electric and gas affordability programs, which are also known as Percentage of Income Payment Plans, or PIP programs. The commissions also use that proceeding to gather information on the performance of income qualified bill assistance and energy programs, which could in some cases lead to future changes to program rules. On January 7th, you all held a commissioners' information meeting to discuss potential priorities for staff and commission work related to income qualified programs in 2025. And we're still thinking through the discussion and the guidance from that session and anticipate coming back to you all at future CWMs with next steps. But in the meantime, one thing we did discuss is that it may make sense to consider changes to some upcoming deadlines that are in the commission's rules to allow more opportunities for program evaluation. And that's specifically Electric Rule 3412K and Gas Rule 4412K, which set requirements that the Colorado Energy Office lead a third-party evaluation of PIP programs every 3 years. Under current timelines, that evaluation process would start late this year, based on the period ending October 31st of this year. But the discussion the commission had on January 7th included some possible priorities for program enhancements that could result in changes to rules or practices. So I can take questions or make a recommendation.
If you can make a recommendation, that'd be great.
Thank you. The 3-year evaluation period may be too tight to allow for thoughtful work on the program enhancements being considered. We're still working through the recommendations provided from the evaluation report that was filed in 2024 and lessons learned from the implementation of the utility bill help program. And in particular, further stakeholder discussions are going to be imperative to think through specific modifications. So accordingly, we recommend the commission require the impacted electric and gas utilities, Atmos, Black Hills, Colorado Natural Gas, and Public Service to file a consensus filing or conferral report addressing whether the timeline for the evaluation should be extended, and if so, by how much. The utilities should confer with the Colorado Energy Office and other stakeholders as appropriate. And we further recommend the commission seek comments on any other administrative issues that would need to be addressed if that extension is desirable, which could include something like the treatment of funds set aside to hire the third-party evaluator. And we recommend this be filed by February 13th.
Commissioner Gilman,
I agree.
Commissioner Plant,
I also agree.
as do I. And I think that can be ABC to the extent you need it ABC.
Great. Thank you, commissioners.
All right. Commissioner Gilman, anything else before we adjourn?
No, nothing additional.
Commissioner Plant,
Nope.
thanks all. With that, we're adjourned.